Hello out there in YouTube land.
Welcome back.
Welcome to the next installment of Ma by Moi.
Yes.
So this is part 1, chapter 1. 11 a.m. Warriors come in many guises. Some have guns and are parts of a large army. Others are standalone and wield a hefty sword. For Marco, they are members of the street gangs of New York. Each day was a struggle, a battle, and those who won were the ones that got to eat, live. He was happy to be one of them. Part of it was fear, part of it was constitution, and part of it was sheer fucking insanity. But being a warrior had its advantages. It meant family and some measure of safety. He'd seen what it was like to not be part of a family, and he didn't want any part of that. At least like this. He had access to anything he needed more often than not, and how they got it didn't matter so much when you were trying to survive. In fact, Marco thought he was big shit until it happened. Marco! Deacon ran down the street toward him. Marco was standing outside his apartment building, soaking in some of the meager summer sunlight. The smog was so thick that the city seemed almost bathed in perpetual nighttime. Well, not that bad maybe, but pretty damn bad. It had been that way since the Great War of 2027. The whole thing had gotten started because of a fight over the ownership of the ports of the country. Somehow it had escalated into all-out civil war. Marco didn't remember a lot of the particulars. He'd been too young. Born a couple of years after the war had started. What he knew was that he'd never had enough food, and the old books at school had talked about how nice stuff had been before the war. It was now 2049, and things still sucked. Periodically, some politician would mention something about cleaning out the air supply in the lesser areas, but nothing ever moved forward. The oil pipelines that crisscrossed the country were a constant problem. They'd been alternating, burning and leaking since the war. Most things were solar-powered in the rich areas, but they didn't work so well when your sky was covered in smoke. Some places were just desert where there had once been forest. Nobody cared about the people that didn't matter. The rich ones in Manhattan had these huge air purifiers that cleaned the air around the city. They spared no expense for the people who meant something. They had plenty of sunshine and clean air, nothing like that in Coney. The lessers didn't matter. Deacon was wearing the colors. He'd done so much to get them. They were their uniform of sorts. Colors were important to a gang. They let each gang know who belonged to who and who you didn't, and, most importantly, if you were friendly. If you weren't and happened to pass through the wrong territory, well, you'd be lucky if all you got was your ass beat. Most didn't make it. Marco had seen some tough shit over the years, and he was thankful for any luck he could summon, too. The colors for the T-bones were a fake leather vest with a big patch on the back depicting a pit bull gnawing on a T-bone steak. Everyone had voted on it when the gang was born. There had been 20 of them then. Time had not been kind to them. The T-bones were down to 7. Being a warrior was a tough life. Marco wasn't sure he wanted to be tough anymore. Marco held out his hand to Deacon and they shook. Deacon's black hair was cropped close to his head, so close you could see the dark skin underneath. He was flashing this huge, shit-eating grin. "What's up, man?" Marco asked. Deacon held the edges of his vest in his hands. "The usual. Transmitter went out on my watch again." Marco laughed. Deacon was some type of old-school holdout. He insisted on using this ancient computer watch to tell time. Nobody did that anymore, well, unless you're really old. Of course, he wasn't even sure they made new ones anymore. Deacon had gotten his at a pawn shop. Normal people had ocular implants. Marco was never sure if Deacon was afraid of the surgery or what. It wasn't like Deacon couldn't steal enough money for the surgery. That's what they all did anyway. Granted, Marco's device was basic, but he could upgrade it when he wanted to. When he could afford it, anyway. Marco pointed at the watch on Deacon's left wrist. "When you gonna give that thing up?" Deacon laughed. "When you give up that fucking red mohawk shit." Marco grunted. He shaved the sides of his head every morning so he could look neat and tidy. The red hair he couldn't help. It came natural. Weird given his dad was black, but his mom's Irish roots must have been hella strong. His skin was still darker than a lot of people, though. His dad must have been like Africa dark or something. Marco wouldn't know. He never met him. Hell, his mama had never even shown him a picture. Sometimes he wondered what his dad would have been like. If he'd been strong or if he'd had some sense of dedication, but he always came up short. The fact that he didn't stick around was all the proof Marco needed as to what type of father he had. He'd been better off without him. "You're just jealous of my style and good looks," Marco said. Deacon laughed and rolled his eyes. "You wish." "So what's going down today?" Marco asked. Deacon wiped the sweat off his forehead. Marco was starting to feel damp himself. The city was heating up for the day. By noon it would be so hot that nobody would be out on the streets. Summertime sucked. Period. Deacon stretched. "Khalid said Jameson wants to go down to Red Hook." Marco froze. This was not the news he needed today. Red Hook was bad news. "Shit, man, nothing good happens down there." Deacon shook his head. "You're telling me? Last thing we need is to head off to Bowker territory." Marco rocked back on his heels. The Bowkers were some badass dudes. While guns had been outlawed years ago, another result of the war, smart people, including gang members, started making their own weapons. And if you're particularly good at it, you could make some money in the lesser territories. The Bowkers were unique, though. Most gangs formed out of necessity to provide protection and support. The Bowkers, however, formed out of a love for torture and pain. Rumor had it that there was this wicked initiation ceremony, but no one never said exactly what it was. The Bowkers wanted it that way. And, well, if you joined them, you didn't talk. If you didn't make it through the test, your body was found out in the street eaten up by flies. They had these fucked-up machete-looking things with long spiny teeth. Marco's friend Doug had bought it with one of these. One of the teeth broke off in his leg in the middle of a fight, and the infection set in. There wasn't much medical care down in the Lessers. Hell, there wasn't much of anything. It wasn't cool. "What's he want to go down to Red Hook for?" Marco asked. Deacon wiggled his eyebrows. "Got a honey." Marco kicked the steps leading to the door to his building. He didn't exactly like risking his life for a piece of ass, especially when he wasn't the one getting it. None of this seemed worth it anymore. Fuck, just what we need. He wants some pussy, so we all buy it. Deacon sighed. "I ain't got nothing else to do. Khalid ain't objecting." Jameson was the father, the head of the gang. Khalid was the uncle and second in command. Marco was starting to think the best thing to happen would be for them both to croak, let someone else run the shit for a while. They'd been pulling a bit too much crap lately. He didn't dare say that, but he wondered if Deacon felt it too, but he'd never ask. It wasn't worth the risk of Deacon saying anything, even if it didn't mean to. Plus, who the hell would lead them then? What a joke. Marco wanted to keep his head for a while longer. If he was patient, then there was some chance he would move up eventually. Better that way. He'd have more time to learn what was good and what was sincerely fucked up.
Marco would need to start working on the kid in case he ever did try for a play for a father. He'd need a second. Not that he wanted to fight Jameson to the death or anything, but there was part of him that wondered what he could do if he actually was in a position of power. There was some sort of potential for sure. Jameson was too free with his antics. The boy liked violence too much. At least if Marco could get in charge, they would all have a chance at survival. Or a better chance anyway. Nothing was a sure thing when it came to their world. Every so often Marco would glance at Deacon out of the corner of his eye. Deacon kept looking down the alleyways and up at the sky, doing what was right, watching out for attacks that could come from any direction. Marco wished he could stop his brain and be like his friend sometimes. Deacon had his head where it needed to be, whereas Marco was wandering around thinking about all the shit that didn't matter. Not them. He needed to pay more attention. Even though Coney was their territory, there were always new gangs sprouting up, just waiting to take down someone with cred. That was how you bought it most of the time, not being careful. For now, that was his job, to keep his eyes open. He needed to get his head in the game.
Marco was glad that the walk to Khalid's didn't take long, which was good because it had to be about 90. If they were lucky, the city would get the cooling station back up today. It had been down for over a week and people were getting cranky. Back in the day, people always had to suffer this heat. Mostly it depended on whether you could afford your electric bill, whether you had air conditioning or not. Now the city took care of everything. People didn't need individual units anymore, not when the outside was controlled to 70 all year round. Well, that is when the unit worked. Marco supposed he should feel thankful that they even granted them a cooling station to begin with. The only reason they even bothered with a cooling station in Coney is that they needed the lessers, as much as they didn't want to admit it. And the higher the heat, the more skin infections and other nasty things helped kill them off faster than they wanted. The government needed to mix up the genetics now and then. Wouldn't do for the rich fucks to give birth to kids with 3 arms and no eyes. Marco was just glad that his mom wasn't around to have to fuck with all this. She died last fall from some wasting disease. The clinics hadn't been open in years, so once she started coughing up blood, Marco had known it wouldn't be that long. He just wished he could have made her passing easier. She died hard. He hated to see her go, but her body had been ravaged by so much with her job and her health, it was best that she finally got to rest. He shook himself out of thinking about the past and forced himself to pay attention to his surroundings. There would be time later on to reflect. Now, though, he needed to keep his head straight. He and Deacon headed down the street, eyes peeled for anything weird. Never hurt to watch out for anything that was unusual. You never knew when the government was going to release some new horror. Like the time they tried to revive the idea of a streetcar without telling anyone and plowed through a bunch of people. It wasn't just that they had to worry about that, though. The buildings were in such bad shape that bricks falling were a common occurrence. You'd think the government would want their breeding stock to be safe, but they never seemed to act on anything until a major disaster happened. The temperature thing had killed too many of them. Other things didn't seem to worry them as much. Must have been cheaper that way. "Hey, ginger motherfucker, where you think you're going?" Marco stopped and spun around. Tommy Big Tits was standing beside an old burned-out hunk of metal that used to be a car. He was a general all-round pain in the ass. It wasn't any secret that in his mind he still felt the Italians owned everything. They called him Big Tits because he had the biggest motherfucking man boobs anyone had ever seen. Man needed to wear a bra, but he must have enjoyed the notoriety because he walked around most of the time without a shirt on. Weird dude. Marco hadn't seen an Italian guy in forever. Everybody was brown in his neck of the woods, well, except for Tommy, that is, and he didn't count. He was overweight and always dirty. Not that the two went hand in hand, but Tommy never seemed to bathe. Ever. It was damn gross. Marco didn't even know if Tommy had family. He might have been dropped from the sky as far as anyone knew. They weren't exactly chatty, so he didn't exactly know the history. "What you want?" Deacon asked. Tommy laughed. His pasty white skin looked nasty today, almost greasy. Who the hell knew when the fucker had last had a bath? Marco had bet it had been months. He suppressed a sugar. "Just pulling Marco's leg," Tommy said. "Uh-huh. Fucker just didn't want to get his ass kicked. He was always trying to start something. So, you done?" He shook his head slowly, almost as if scanning the area. "Something's not right today. I can feel it. Sky's all wrong." Marco looked up. He could still see some sunshine between the clouds. Looked okay to him. Well, normal anyway. Maybe Tommy'd been huffing too much glue or some such shit. "You been sniffing again, Tommy?" Deacon asked. Tommy rolled his eyes. "Believe me, don't believe me, I don't fucking care. Don't say I didn't warn you." Then he bowed his head and walked back behind the car and into the alley beyond. What he was doing back there, who the hell knew? But Marco didn't really want to find out. No sense in letting his imagination get the better of him, or actually have the visual of what was really back there. Could be worse than anything he could think up. Well, that was weird. Marco looked up at the sky again and shook his head. Then he focused his attention on Deacon. Deacon stared at him. "Don't be getting your hackles up, man ain't exactly reliable." Deacon started walking down the street again. Marco followed, looking back every so often as if the boogeyman was going to come out of nowhere. While he normally wouldn't trust Tommy, the guy seemed to freak out, and that was enough to make Marco uneasy.
"Now, what took you motherfuckers so long?" Khalid asked as Marco and Deacon walked into the apartment. Khalid's place was in this crumbling brownstone that looked like it was going to fall in any minute. There were bugs, but not too many. Marco had seen worse, like the place he'd grown up in. There had been a spot in the floor that had been completely rotted through. He'd fallen through it twice. Both times, lucky enough to hit a pile of rotten trash. Only got a few cuts and a sprained ankle. "We walked," Deacon said. Khalid started laughing, his rotten front teeth showing black against the pink of his gums. His laugh almost sounded almost like a bark. Really weird. Not like normal. Usually it was more of a regular laugh. Maybe he'd gotten a hold of some dope or something. Almost unheard of in these days, mostly because with the sky and the cost of electricity, it was hard to grow. Suddenly his face got all serious. "What year is it?" 2049, Marco said. He had no idea where the fuck Khalid was going with this, but it didn't look good. An ass ripping was coming for sure. And he was really getting tired of biting his tongue. It was starting to bleed. Nodded like he was trying to humor Marco, his chin bobbing in an almost exaggerated way. And why ain't you got some wheels? Marco paused. Really? Ain't nobody got wheels anymore. Only the rich assholes could afford the extra electricity charge. Public transportation was a joke down here in Coney. All they had were the tubes, and those just traveled to different boroughs, not to different places in Coney. Coney wasn't really big enough for that. And there was no bus that was going to stop there, not even during the day. Too many muggings. "'Cause you ain't got one either," Marco said. It was damn true, too. Only so much shit he would actually eat. And, well, if it got him punched in the mouth, he'd just punch back. His limit had been reached. Khalid grunted. Bunch of bullshit. He turned his head toward Deacon and motioned with his chin toward the kitchen. Deacon ran, filled a glass with water from the sink, and then came back and handed Khalid the glass. He reminded Marco of an ant scurrying on a log. Marco wondered if he'd ever been that desperate. He didn't think so. Khalid took a drink. "So," Marco said, "Deacon said you wanted to go to Red Hook." He grunted. "Jameson does. Maybelline said she might have a job for us." Marco sighed. It was getting worse and worse. Maybelline was Jameson's sometimes girl. Mostly when he felt like it. She was trouble with a capital T. All Marco wanted was a normal damn day. He could see this going to shit real fast. "When you want to leave?" Marco asked. It was probably better to get it all over with. Maybe, if they got there early, everyone would be too tired to start shit. Khalid set his glass down on the grubby coffee table in front of him. "Sit down. Gotta wait for Jameson. He's got more info about this job."
And that's the end of Chapter 1. So we'll be back soon with Chapter 2. And until next time,
Bye.
bye.